The modern world loves to roll its eyes at the idea of the devil. Most people chalk it up to superstition or old stories we've outgrown, but if you look at history, ignoring darkness has never actually stopped it. Every culture, and I mean everyone, has some version of a force that goes beyond what we can explain. Call it demons, call it spirit, call it whatever you want. Even people who don't believe in anything supernatural still talk about the mind splitting under pressure or fear spreading through a community until it changes the way people behave. Whether you think it's something external or something deep inside us, the shadows don't just disappear because we pretend they're not there. If anything, they get bolder when no one's paying attention. This is the story of Julia.
Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path.
The idea of spirits taking hold of someone isn't new. It's not some fringe belief that popped up in a single religion or in one part of the world. For most of human history, people genuinely believed that when someone started acting differently, sudden changes in their personality, violent outbursts, voices that don't sound like their own, something external and evil had gotten in. In ancient Mesopotamia, early Judaism, Christianity, Islamic, Hindu traditions, indigenous cultures across the Americas and Africa, they all have their own version of possession, and the rituals meant to push that darkness out. When you look at it from a distance, it makes sense why people reach for that explanation. Before psychology and neurology, before we understood trauma or mental illness, communities needed ways to explain behavior that was completely out of character. If someone who was always gentle suddenly became aggressive or terrified or unpredictable, the idea of an evil spirit stepping in didn't feel like it was that far-fetched. It was a way to make sense of the unexplainable and a way to fight back against it. Even now, in a world that loves to think it's too modern or too rational for that kind of belief, possession hasn't disappeared. It's been around for thousands of years and it's not going anywhere. Something people forget is not every culture treats possession like a horror movie situation. A lot of traditions actually invite spirits in, not evil ones, but ancestors, guides, and divine forces meant to help with healing, decision-making, or ritual work. Take seances, for example. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, especially during the spiritualist movements, people gathered specifically to communicate with the dead. They weren't trying to fight anything off, they were trying to open the door. Mediums would let spirits speak through them, sometimes going into trances so that the voice or message could come through more clearly. Then you've got speaking in tongues or glossolalia. In certain Christian traditions, it's not framed as possession. It's more of a form of surrendering control. Believers describe it as the Holy Spirit moving through them, taking over their voice, their language, their expression, in ways that they couldn't produce on their own. It's welcomed, even encouraged, and seen as a sign of divine presence. And in voodoo, Haitian voodoo in particular, possession is one of the central parts of ceremony. Practitioners invite in the lua, the spirits, to mount them. It's not scary or unwanted, it is an honor. The spirits use the person's body to dance, give advice, offer blessings, or communicate with the community. When the spirit leaves, the person usually doesn't remember what happened, but the people around them do. It's considered a sacred moment, not a dangerous one. And even though a lot of modern cultures like to treat the devil as a joke or a leftover superstition, the belief in demonic possessions hasn't gone anywhere. If anything, it's still incredibly common. Surveys vary, but roughly half the population today say that they believe possession is real, not metaphorically or symbolically, but as an actual force that can take hold of someone. Here's the part that really surprises people. Reports of possession and requests for exorcisms have actually been increasing over the last couple of decades. Catholic dioceses in the US and Europe have said that they're getting more calls now than ever. Some of them have even trained additional exorcists because the demand is so high. And whether you think that's spiritual, psychological, or cultural, the trend is real. But with that comes the rise of something darker. There have been cases where exorcisms have turned deadly. The most well-known is Anneliese Michael in 1970s, a young woman in Germany whose death led to criminal charges against the priests and her parents. It's not just history. As recently as 2022, a 3-year-old girl living in California died during what her family described as an exorcism. And in some impoverished and marginalized communities, the line between exorcism and child abuse gets blurred. Kids who show signs of trauma, disability, or mental illness are sometimes labeled as possessed, especially if there has recently been a tragedy that affects the whole family or the community. And what follows can be violent or neglectful. Some people can go to some pretty extreme lengths when it comes to demonic beliefs. At one point, a common practice was to drill holes into the skull so that evil spirits could escape easily. What's interesting is that even experts who don't believe in literal demons acknowledge why the belief exists. A Harvard psychologist once said that throughout history, belief in demonic possession has been a reasonable response to behavior that seems impossible to explain. Before we had language for psychosis, epilepsy, dissociation, or trauma, people reached for something that they could understand. Today, we actually have a much clearer picture of what people used to call demonic possession. Influences like Dorothea Dix, an American activist and nurse, helped create the shift from supernatural to science. A lot of the stuff that terrified families in the past looks a whole lot like mental health conditions we understand now. Take Anneliese Michaels. Many experts think that she was actually dealing with epilepsy. And with things like schizophrenia, people can hear voices, see things that aren't there, or feel like their thoughts aren't their own. They'll say it feels like someone is speaking through them. After the pandemic, things got even more complicated. Exorcist reports went up, like noticeably. At the exact same time, mental health crises were spiking. Some early research suggests that certain infections, especially ones that cause inflammation in the brain, can mess with a person's sense of control. It can make someone feel disconnected from themselves. And if you're already scared or stressed, that feeling can be terrifying. Even with everything we know now, the line between possession and a medical or psychological crisis can still feel blurry. In places like Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, unusual behavior was usually labeled as possession. If someone heard voices, couldn't speak, had seizures, or acted in a way that frightened their family, it was described as a spirit taking hold of them. Mental illness wasn't even a category. People believed that the gods were involved and that those afflicted were being punished for some sort of offense. The idea carried into early Christianity. Michael Perry, a Catholic priest who works in deliverance ministry, defines possession as a person's will being taken over by something alien. And if you look at how possession is described in the Bible, a lot of it sounds like medical issues we now understand: seizures, mutism, blindness. Most of the people Jesus exorcised in the Synoptic Gospels weren't acting psychotic. They were sick or disabled. Historians have written about how possession was identified in the Christian West. Brian Levesque documented the signs that were taken seriously in the early modern period. The checklist included symptoms of convulsion, rigidity, contortions, sudden strength, trances, visions, blasphemy, strange voices, fasting, vomiting, and even levitation. It was a mix of physical symptoms, psychological symptoms, and things people just didn't have explanations for. Modern deliverance ministers now have their own lists. Perry includes reactions to Christian symbols, trances during prayers, sudden strength, clairvoyance, and voices that appear during an exorcism. These descriptions come from clergy who believe possession is rare but real. Because even now, people are split. In one survey, Protestant Christians in Australia, over a third said mental illness might be the cause of demonic possession. And among psychiatric patients in Europe, beliefs about demons aren't uncommon either. So you've got this huge divide, people who think possession is real and rare, and people who think everything can be explained by science. And then there's this middle group, the ones who don't believe in literal demons, but still use the word demons to describe things like trauma, injustice, or the darker parts of society. And then there are people who try to evaluate these cases from both angles. One of the most well-known is Dr. Richard Gallagher. Richard Gallagher is a board-certified psychiatrist. He's professor of psychiatry at New York Medical College and also teaches at the Columbia University Psychoanalysis Institute. Before that, he graduated magna cum laude from Princeton, was elected to Pi Beta Kappa, and then trained in psychiatry at Yale. His background is solid, and he's been in clinical practices for decades. It is because of this training that Catholic clergy started contacting him in the late 1980s. They wanted someone outside of the church to look at people who were being evaluated for possession. Gallagher agreed to consult, and the requests kept coming. Over the past 30 years, he's worked with many priests and ministries who all wanted a psychiatric opinion before moving forward with an exorcism. He said he has been involved in hundreds of these evaluations. Most of them, in his view, had medical or psychological explanations. He's also said that there were a small number, out of 1,000, maybe 100, that he couldn't explain through psychiatry. Gallagher is the only psychiatrist who has served for several years on the governing board of the International Association of Exorcists. That group is based in Rome and includes clergy from different countries who handle cases of alleged possession. His role wasn't to perform exorcisms, he was there as a medical consult. He believes that genuine possessions are rare but possible. He doesn't claim to diagnose it, and he doesn't say it replaces medical care. His job is to rule out medical illness. Out of all of the cases that Gallagher has been a part of, there is one that stands apart from the rest. One case that he says is the creepiest case he's ever experienced. The possession of a woman about 39 years old, named Julia. Here, I feel it is important to say, firstly, Julia is a pseudonym. Her real name has never been recorded. And she did give Gallagher consent to share her story, as she wanted to warn others of what is possible. Also, Gallagher was never her doctor. His involvement was pro bono as a consultant. Although he would write her story years later, Gallagher first met Julia in the late 1980s. Through his work, Gallagher had befriended a priest that we'll call Father Jacques. This father had a woman he wanted Gallagher to meet. This woman believed that she was possessed by a demon, and she had no history of mental health issues but needs help, and Gallagher agreed to meet her. Up to this point, Julia had been examined by 2 other medical professionals, both of whom believed that she was truly possessed by a demon. She had also had about 7 or 8 exorcisms performed on her already, but she was willing to try again. One morning, Father Jacques brings this woman to Gallagher's home. She's about 39 years old with dark eye makeup and is dressed in long flowing black clothing. This is Julia. And she looks at Gallagher up and down and then says, "How'd you like those cats last night?" Gallagher is shocked because the night before he had to break up a fight between his 2 otherwise docile and friendly cats. At the time, he had simply wrote the event off as some bad food and had forgotten about it until this moment. At first, Gallagher was annoyed because normally he meets for consultations in his office. But today, Father Jacques had just showed up at his doorstep unannounced with this woman. But after her comment about the cats, he was interested. And this was the start of his work with her. It would be the first of many strange events that occurred during his time with Julia, not to mention the stories that he is later told by Father Jacques. For example, Julia showed clairvoyancy in ways that were pretty hard to ignore. She would bring up details that she had no normal way of knowing. The comment about the cats wasn't just a one-off event. During one session, she started to talk about Gallagher's mother and how the woman had died from ovarian cancer. Gallagher had never shared anything about his family with her, and this was a time before Google, so she couldn't exactly just look this up. Another time, she complained about a psychiatrist that she had only ever spoken to on the phone. She didn't like him and said so. In the middle of her rant, she described the inside of his house. She even talked about the color of his curtains, but she had never been inside of his home. Later, she decided to show Gallagher just how in control of these powers she could be. Father Jacques had been organizing the priests for her exorcism, and one of them was a man Gallagher doesn't name in his writings, so we'll just call him Father Tom. He was one of the most experienced exorcists in America. During one of their sessions, Julia tells Gallagher that she can see this priest. It's as if she's staring right at him. She describes him walking along a beach near the church, and she says that he's wearing a blue windbreaker and khaki pants. Gallagher doesn't really believe her, so she calls Father Tom. He answered and said that he had stepped out for a walk by the shoreline. He confirmed the khaki pants and the windbreaker. When Gallagher asked about the color of the windbreaker, Father Tom just laughs and says, "Oh, you must be talking to Julia." And it's not just clairvoyancy that she displays. She also displays telepathy as well. Dr. Gallagher has reported books flying off of their shelves and across the room during a few of their sessions. Remember how earlier I mentioned a part of possession was speaking in voices that are not your own? Well, Father Jacques and Gallagher were driving with Julia one afternoon. They were talking about the schedule for her upcoming exorcism. Julia was quiet, listening, answering when they asked her something, nothing unusual. Suddenly, her whole posture changed. Her head dropped forward and her eyes lost focus. A sound came out of her that didn't sound like her normal voice at all. It was low and rough, and it cut through the car loud enough that Gallagher turned in his seat. The voice said, "Leave her alone, you stupid monkey priest. She is ours." Julia was not reacting to anything around her. She wasn't looking at either of them. She was swaying in her seat, locked in a trance. The voice kept going, throwing insults at Father Jacques, threatening him, repeating that she belonged to them. It didn't stop. It went on for about 10 minutes while the car kept moving. When it ended fast. Julia blinked a few times, sat upright, and then asked what they had been talking about. She looked confused when Gallagher brought up what had happened. She said she didn't remember any of it. And this wasn't an isolated situation. There were other situations that were similar like this. One such, Father Jacques and Gallagher were on the phone one evening. They were going over the date for Julia's next session, checking on the time, making sure everyone would be there. It was a normal call, nothing strange. In the middle of the conversation, another voice cut in. It was the same guttural voice that they had heard in the car. It didn't sound like Julia. It didn't sound like anyone who should have been on the line. The voice again told Father Jacques to stop interfering. It said Julia belonged to Satan and that he needed to stay out of their affairs. At first, they thought that maybe Julia had picked up another receiver somewhere in the church, but when they checked, she wasn't there. No one else was on the line. The voice kept talking for several seconds. Neither of them could explain how it happened. They were the only two people on the call when it started. And these things were not just happening to Gallagher. Father Jacques and Father Tom had once offered to drive Julia home after a late meeting. She got into the back of the car, buckled in, and didn't say much. The car pulled out of the parking lot, and a few minutes into the drive, her posture shifted. Her eyes fixed on nothing and her face went blank. It was something that they had seen previously. She was prone to go into trances like this. The guttural voice came out of her again. It told them to leave her alone. It repeated that they had no business interfering with her. As the voice kept going, dark shapes and shadows moved across the windows. They weren't solid, but they were enough to block the view of the road. At the same time, every light in the car went out. The dashboard, the interior light, even the headlights. The road ahead just disappeared. Father Tom steered off to the side and the car slid into a shallow ditch. The moment the car stopped, the shapes and shadows vanished, and the lights came back on like nothing had happened. Neither priest was hurt, so they turned to check on Julia. She was sitting upright in the back seat, calm and smiling at them. These are all things that Dr. Gallagher cannot explain through science. And then he starts to get a better idea of what she's been through, and things start to make a bit more sense. Julia told Gallagher that she was involved in a satanic group. She said that she had held a high position in it and that she was afraid of the people running it. In his writings and interviews, Gallagher never named the group. He said he avoids identifying them because he doesn't want to draw attention to them, and honestly, he's kind of scared of them. Julia had been raised Catholic. Her childhood was difficult, and by her teens, she said she had been through trauma that pushed her away from the church. She told Gallagher that she had been stalked and sexually assaulted by a Catholic priest when she was a teenager, and that experience cut her off from the religion that she grew up in. It's around this time that a friend told her about a local satanic sect. Gallagher believed that she was looking for a place where she felt accepted. She went to one of their meetings and stayed. The leader was a man named Daniel. Julia described him as confident and attractive. She said he was the first man that she ever met who seemed to be in complete control. They became sexually involved, and she was drawn deeper into the group. The cult centered its rituals around pleasure. They worshipped a demon that she called Osmodeus, associated with lust. Their ceremonies included sexual practices and orgies and black masses, which were parodies of Catholic rites that involved stealing consecrated hosts for their rituals. Inside the group, they gave her a title. They called her the Queen of Voluptuous Delights. Julia liked the attention. She liked the status. She said she felt valued in a way that she hadn't before. As her involvement grew, the group treated her as someone chosen for higher roles. She told Gallagher that part of her status came from being expected to become pregnant. Without getting into too much detail, some of the practices involved fetuses and blood sacrifices. This raised her standing from high priestess to what they called Satan's queen. According to Julia, that rise in status required making a commitment to the devil himself. She said that the commitment changed her life and set the stage for everything that came later, including the events that brought her to Gallagher. Julia told Gallagher that the powers she showed didn't come out of nowhere. She said they came from her involvement with the cult and from the commitments and sacrifices she had made inside it. For a long time, she was proud of her position. She liked the attention. She liked the authority. She said she felt powerful. She could move things with her mind without touching them, and the group treated her like someone who was chosen. But everything changed when she reached middle age. Now she was having trouble getting pregnant, and the cult saw that as a problem, so her status dropped. Daniel, the leader that she had been close with, pulled away from her. She said she loved him and believed that he cared about her as well, and losing that connection pushed her into deep despair. She told Gallagher that more demons came into her life during that period, and that the abilities she once enjoyed became frightening. This is when she starts to see the cost of everything she has done and everything that's been done to her. This is when she goes back to the church for help. She tells Gallagher that she didn't have anywhere else to go. After everything Gallagher has seen and heard, he decides that Julia isn't experiencing any mental health issues. She may have some personality disorder, but that it isn't what's causing all the strange behaviors and abilities. What makes possession different from a mental health disorder are a few things. We are looking for things like incredible strength that comes out of nowhere, what is referred to as hidden knowledge, things a person couldn't possibly know about certain people, places, or situations, speaking languages that a person doesn't understand, psychokinetic abilities like throwing objects around the room without touching them, and impossible physical acts like levitation. Some of these are even described in the Bible. For example, in Mark 9, Jesus goes to a young boy who's possessed by demons. According to the boy's father, the demon was able to throw the boy into fire and water. It says in Mark 9:22, "And it, the evil spirit, has often thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, Take pity on us and help us." This is the answer Father Jacques wanted to hear, and with this diagnosis, he performs the exorcism. All right, so picture this. It's a warm June evening, but inside the little chapel they're using, the air feels wrong. Not cold like a draft, cold like something settling over the room. A small group of nuns are already there praying quietly. Father Jacques and Father Tom are setting up. There are 3 laymen, the muscle, that are standing close because they know what's coming. Julia walks in calm. She sits down like she's ready for a meeting, not an exorcism, even though she knows what's coming. After all, this is her 9th exorcism. Then the priests start with the prayers, and she slips into this trance, totally still, and then just snaps awake like someone flipped a switch. And then the voices start, not one voice, but multiple. One is deep and guttural, like it's coming from the floor. Another is high-pitched, and then one that just spits Latin. But Julia doesn't know Latin. She's also speaking Spanish, another language that she doesn't know. Then someone tests her. They sprinkle regular water on her without telling anyone. Nothing. No reaction. Then the second the holy water touches her, she screams like she's in pain. The guttural voice starts shouting at the priests, "Leave her alone, you fucking priests. Stop, you whores. You'll be sorry." It's loud. It's angry. It's not her voice. The room is suddenly hot. The attendees are dripping in sweat. Moments later, the room is cold again. The temperature keeps fluctuating wildly. The prayers kept going. Her body reacts hard. Her spine bends backward in this way that looks impossible. Witnesses compared it to a bow being pulled tight. Her limbs twist. Her whole body convulses when the priest switched to Latin, and the air in the room gets heavy. People later said that it felt like trying to breathe through a blanket, and there's this smell, too, like rotting flesh that just shows up out of nowhere. Now there's more sounds, growls coming out of her that don't sound human. Some of them are low like a lion, others buzz like a swarm of bees, all of it coming from her throat. The 3 laymen move to hold her down. She's about 90 pounds, but she fights them like she weighs twice that, and they're struggling to keep her on the table. And then she lifts off of it. She levitates for 30 minutes. The nuns are praying nonstop. The priests are shouting prayers over the voices coming out of her. The laymen are trying to keep her steady, even though she's not touching the table anymore. Every time a crucifix gets close, she recoils. Every time scripture is read, the guttural voices try to drown it out. Holy water hits her skin and she screams. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stops. Her body drops back down to the table. Her breathing evens out. The voices go silent. She opens her eyes like she's waking up from a nap. Everyone is relieved. It worked. Julia is going to be okay. But Julia looks around the room, at the faces around her, and then she shakes her head and starts to cry. It didn't work. She can still feel the presence inside of her. So here's the thing about Julia's case. That exorcism you just walked through wasn't her first. It was her 9th. And by the time it was over, she was exhausted, the priests were exhausted, and Gallagher could see where this was heading. Some people respond to exorcisms immediately. One session and the symptoms stop. Others need several rounds before anything changes. Gallagher has always said the same thing about it. The outcome depends on the person's willingness. The ritual can only push so far. The rest has to come from the person who's possessed. And in Julia's case, that willingness just wasn't there. See, she still wanted Daniel. She still wanted the community that she had in the cult. She still wanted the status she'd built there. Even after everything she told Gallagher, part of her wasn't ready to let go of the life she had. And Gallagher believed that as long as she held on to that connection, the demon wasn't going anywhere. After that 9th exorcism, she didn't schedule another one. She didn't follow up with the church. She didn't try again. Instead, she went back to the cult. About a year later, Dr. Gallagher heard from Julia again. Although she wanted to try again, medically she couldn't. Julia was sick with ovarian cancer, terminally. Dr. Gallagher never heard from her again and has assumed that she passed away from her illness. Okay, so here's the deal. Julia's case is one of the most famous possession stories in modern Catholic circles, and almost everything we know about it comes from one person, Dr. Richard Gallagher. And Gallagher, he isn't some fringe figure. He's a board-certified psychiatric, trained at Yale, Princeton educated, a professor of New York Medical College, and one of the only psychiatrists who ever served on the governing board of the International Association of Exorcisms. His credentials are real, his career is real, his reputation in medicine is real. But here's the problem. We don't even know if Julia was real. In fact, with this case, there are a lot of unknowns. We don't know her real name, not the names of the priests, not the location, not the covenant, not the chapel, not the leaven, nothing. Gallagher changed every identifying detail. He said he did it for privacy and safety, especially because Julia was involved in a dangerous cult. But because of that, there's no way to independently verify any part of her story. There are no medical records. There are no church documents. There are no witnesses who have come forward other than Gallagher. There's no paper trail. There's nothing you can cross-check. And the more you really start to look at Julia's story, the more things start to feel off. The timing is an issue. Gallagher was working with her right in the middle of the satanic panic, when people were convinced that there were cults hiding behind every strip mall. And Julia, she fits the stereotype almost too perfectly. The heavy black eyeliner, the all-black clothes, the satanic high priestess vibe. It's exactly what the media was pumping out at the time frame. So here you have this Catholic psychiatrist, if I hadn't mentioned that before, who is now giving us a story that sounds a lot like cinema. And on top of that, there's the cult that she describes, the fetus sacrifices, the blood rituals, the demon of lust, the charismatic leader, the queen title. It's basically the satanic panic starter pack, and none of it matches with what real satanic groups actually believe or practice. The Satanic Temple, for example, is very clear. No harming children, no harming animals, no violence, no sacrifices. They're basically political activists with dramatic branding, not horror movie villains. Older fringe satanic groups didn't operate the way that Julia was describing. Her version sounds more like the fear of Satanism than anything that's ever been documented in real life. And speaking of documented, there has never been any known documented satanic cults or cults in general that sound like what Julia was describing. And I'm not saying that he was outright lying. Maybe Gallagher was just misled, and maybe not through malice or intent, but just the whole case is very overwhelming. I mean, some of the more supernatural events, Gallagher wasn't even there for. For example, the shadows taking over the car, the dashboard lights cutting out, the black shapes covering the window, all that came from the priests. He only heard about it afterwards. So if they misread something or exaggerated because they were scared, he'd have no way to know. But let's set that aside for a second, because there are some things that he did encounter that are symptoms of possession. Some of her hidden knowledge could have been coincidence or information that she picked up without anyone noticing, like seeing Father Tom earlier and clocking what he's wearing, or hearing something someone said about Gallagher's mother. But the cat thing, that's harder to explain. The language stuff is another sticking point. You can't just start speaking Latin fluently out of nowhere, especially not while reciting prayers in real time. So maybe Gallagher wasn't lying, maybe he wasn't exaggerating. Maybe he was just dealing with someone who was traumatized, manipulative, incredibly perceptive, and still doing things that don't make sense. And so we're left with this very weird split. On one side, You have a psychiatrist with decades of clinical experience, a spotless academic record, and no history of making wild claims. He's not a paranormal guy. He's not a ghost hunter. He's not selling books about demons. He's very traditional, a very conservative doctor who says, "Look, I've seen a lot of mental illness. This wasn't that." On the other side, you have a story that relies entirely on his word. No names, no documents, no independent confirmation. Just Gallagher saying, "This happened, I was there." And that's where people get stuck. Some believe him because of his credentials. Some don't because the story can't be verified. And some sit in the middle, fascinated, unsettled, and not totally sure what to do with it. So whether Julia was possessed, traumatized, or deeply misunderstood, and whether Dr. Gallagher was a witness, a believer, or something in between, I keep coming back to the same thing that we opened with. That line between mental health and possession, it's thinner than anyone wants to admit, and honestly, cases like this don't make it any easier to draw. Because Julia wasn't a caricature, and she wasn't a movie demon. She was a person. Messy, complicated, hurting. And Gallagher wasn't some wide-eyed amateur chasing shadows. He was a trained psychiatrist who swore that he saw something he couldn't explain through science. And when you put those two people in the same room, you get a story that refuses to sit neatly in one box. And it's stories like these that forces you to look at places where science and belief blur together. And sometimes, ignoring darkness never keeps it away. Sometimes, it only gives it room to grow. Thank you for walking down this crooked path with me. Don't chase demons. Stay out of the darkness. And let the truth light your way forward. I'm Amanda Joy, signing off. If you'd enjoyed this episode of Down the Crooked Path and are curious for more mysterious, bewildering stories, check out us. Thank you for wandering this crooked path. Don't chase demons, stay out of the darkness, and let the truth beneath the whispers guide your way. Amanda Joy, signing off. If you have episode suggestions or a story of your own clawing to be told, write to us at crookedpathsocial@gmail.com. And if you want to keep wandering with us in between episodes, follow along on TikTok and Instagram at Down the Crooked Path. Until next time.